Hi everyone, I'm Jane, and today we are going to demystify mediums. In this video, in particular, we're going to demystify fluid mediums. But before that, let's talk about what acrylic paint is. So acrylic paint, like this one, is typically made up of three elements. First, you have powdered pigments. Now, they're not liquid dyes. They're tiny particles that need a vehicle to carry them across your painting surface. And those vehicles are water and acrylic polymer. The acrylic polymer is what gives the paint its body, texture, and helps hold the pigments together. The water helps prevent the polymers from bonding too early. Now, acrylic paint dries or cures through water evaporation or absorption into the painting surface. As the water dissipates, the acrylic polymers are able to come in contact with each other and form a bond. When they form that bond, they trap the powdered pigments within them, which keeps them safe from coming off or smearing into the next color. This is why it's really important not to use too much water in your paint. Most paint brands suggest that you don't dilute the paint with more than 25% water or any other material that doesn't have a binder in it. And that's because if you add too much water and spread the paint very thin, those polymers get spread way far apart, and then they can't bond together as the water evaporates. This leaves the powdered pigments exposed and much more susceptible to being brushed off with a damp brush, or if you go over it with another color of paint, you might pick up some of those, or even when you varnish, it might smear those pigments around. So that's why when we do glazing, I always tell you it's better to use a medium, gloss medium, glazing medium, something, because those mediums have a binder in them. So you can use very, very little amounts of paint, still have the binder, so it maintains the integrity of the paint. So there's so many brands and types of medium out there that will give you the effect that you're looking for. But since what I know and use is Liquitex, that's what we're going to focus on today. But hopefully it helps you understand how mediums work in general, and that understanding should transfer from one brand to another as well. Even though with some of the brands, their mediums might have slightly different properties. For example, the Liquitex glazing medium dries very quickly so that you can layer colors without having to wait for a lot of drying time. There's another brand who also makes a glazing medium, and their glazing medium actually extends the drying time so that you have more time to work with it. But the glazing properties essentially are the same. If you have any questions about a specific brand, check out their website to see if they have any resources on their materials, or you can call them. Most companies are pretty willing to talk to you and give you information that you're looking for. On Liquitex's website, for example, if you go into resources, there's a free PDF download called the Acrylic book that has lots of information about all of the acrylic mediums that they make. We're going to focus on 5 different mediums today, and I ran out of glazing medium because I just used gloss medium and varnish, but we'll talk about that. Make sure you check out the video description below for a full list of all of the mediums that I'm covering today. Now let's get started. So the first medium we're going to talk about is gloss medium and varnish. Now, I've had a lot of questions. When I just say gloss medium, people get confused because they can only find something called gloss medium and varnish. It's the exact same thing. This medium can be used many, many ways. You can use it to help you blend a little bit. You can use it for glazing. You can use it for varnish. It's a super, super versatile medium. It will make your paint colors a little bit more transparent. And I feel like it dries a little bit quicker, not quite as quick as glazing medium. The Liquitex glazing medium dries very, very fast. This one doesn't dry quite as fast, but I feel like it definitely dries faster than matte medium. So if I am saying we're going to be doing glazing or use gloss medium and varnish can be used for all of those things. Now my palette today is an old plate. This is all dry, and usually I use a brand new plate for you guys in the video so you don't get confused by my million dots of color. But I ran out of plates, so today we're using an old one. And just so you know, this is what I paint on a regular basis. I would still consider this a fairly new plate that's got many, many paintings left in its life. I also have this canvas that I've already prepped. I just painted it in with some yellow, and I have a white streak on the side here. And that white streak is going to help show us how transparent the colors become with the different mediums. Now the gloss medium and varnish does have binders in it, so you can mix this with any amount of paint. You can take the tiniest speck of paint and mix it in with quite a bit of this, and it's not going to compromise the integrity of the paint, meaning it's not going to thin it out too much to make it so the pigments are in danger of coming off of the canvas. So I'm going to pour a little bit out, and you can see it's a little bit milky when it's wet, but as it dries, it goes completely transparent. So keep that in mind when you're using this, especially with darker colors, because it's going to appear a little bit lighter as you apply it, but then when it dries and this milkiness goes away, the color will darken just a little bit. I'm going to take just a little bit of phthalo blue and add it to my palette. Now phthalo blue is quite dark and it will easily cover yellow. So I'm going to take my brush, wet it in my jar, wipe it on the edge, and I wipe it off really well because that helps make sure that I don't have more than 25% water to paint. Now let me show you what phthalo blue and water alone are going to do when I layer it over this yellow. So I'm going to come in right here and start in the white and go down over it. Don't tell Vince I got paint on the table. So it's a little transparent, mostly because that's the nature of acrylic paint, but I wouldn't call that a glaze. So you can definitely see a color shift here from the white to the yellow. Now I'm just going to take what's left on my brush here and come into my gloss medium and mix it in. And I can mix in all of this gloss medium if I like. I'm going to come right here next to it and lay that color down. So the color's much more transparent. You can see where it shifts better from the yellow to the white, but then also notice I've got much more of a green color here, and that's one of the benefits of glazing. Sometimes there's color transitions that you can't really get from mixing two colors together, but by layering them on top of each other, you can absolutely get those color effects. So let's even go lighter. Still just mixing what's left on my brush in with some more medium. I'm going to use the rest of this medium here and get quite a light color. This would definitely be more than 25% mixture. So if I were making this exact same light blue with just water, I would be in danger of compromising the integrity of my paint. And let's go even lighter, a little more. Still just mixing what's on my brush in there. Get a super light color. And so that is what the gloss medium will do. And glazing medium will do the same thing. Again, you may be able to attain this light of a blue using just water, but that paint is now thinned out way too much. And if you go over it again, even just with varnish, you may pick up some of that color and smear it, no matter how long it's had to dry. Now this will dry with a glossy shine to it. So see how it's shiny there? It will be, these three will be much shinier than this one once they're dry. However, if you don't like that glossy shine, don't pick matte medium for a glazing technique because you like matte better than glossy. I prefer matte, but when you're done, once your painting is done and it's perfectly dry, you can varnish it with matte or gloss or satin, any type of sheen of varnish you like, and it will balance all of that out. Now, here's one of the main differences between the gloss medium and glazing medium. This first one that I did, it's still kind of sticky, so you can see my fingerprint there, and I have some blue from touching that. But if I had used glazing medium here, that would be about dry by now. So that's really the only difference that I've seen between the glazing medium and the gloss medium, is the drying time with the gloss medium is a little bit longer than the glazing medium. Now glazing medium, just like gloss medium, you can add as much of it to the paint as you want and it won't compromise the integrity. It won't thin it out too far. If all you have is glazing medium and you just hate how long it takes to dry, you can use a little bit of Slo-Dri blending medium. Mix it with the glazing medium and use that mixture with your paint. You'll get the glaze effect because the Slo-Dri also dries transparent, but it will also keep your glazing medium from drying too fast. Or if you're like me, you can just buy gloss medium and only have to use one medium. So to recap real quick, gloss medium and glazing medium can be used interchangeably for glazing purposes. The gloss medium doesn't dry quite as quick as glazing medium, and if the glazing medium is what you have, you can add a little bit of Slo-Dri to it to prevent it from drying as fast. So this is my very favorite medium in the entire world. This is matte medium, and matte medium can be used in so many different ways, just like gloss medium can. I prefer to use matte medium for blending and also in place of the Slo-Dri blending medium. I feel like the consistency and the texture of the matte medium is a little bit better than the Slo-Dri. I've had issues in the past, and I know a lot of you have, where you use the Slo-Dri and your paint gets sticky and is hard to work with after a little while. And I haven't had that issue at all with the matte medium. It's got a very smooth, creamy consistency. Now, aside from the fact that it has a matte or non-reflective surface once it's dry, is not the only difference between this and gloss medium. Where the gloss medium will make your paint quite transparent, this will make it a little bit transparent, but it makes it more translucent, meaning the light can get through it, but it's not crystal clear. It will have a slightly hazier effect than the gloss medium. So you can't really use this for glazing. You can also use the matte medium as a ground before you paint instead of gesso. I personally don't like the texture of gesso. I think it's got too much of a tooth, and then I have a hard time spreading the paint. This is a nice, smooth medium, but the matte surface does have just a little bit of a tooth to help grab the paint. So if you've got an old canvas or just kind of a junky canvas that has a really heavy texture that you know you're gonna have a hard time with, throw down a couple coats of matte medium, let it dry completely, and then when you paint on it, it's gonna be much smoother and a nicer surface to paint on. You do wanna avoid using this as a varnish though. And I was using it as a varnish for a little while and then realized on the back it says don't. I called Liquitex and asked them why, and they said because it's not actually humidity resistant. So if you're in a really humid climate, it can get a little bit sticky and attract dust. But once it's been varnished, that's not gonna be an issue. So I'm gonna put a little bit out on my plate here, and notice it's really milky. It's almost pure white. Now when it dries, it won't be quite that white. It won't be perfectly clear, but it won't be white like that. And just like with the gloss medium where I said it might make your darker colors look a little bit lighter until it's dry, this will do the same thing. So if you're working with dark colors, if it looks light enough to you when mixed with this, you might want to go just a tiny bit lighter because it will dry darker. So I'm going to take a little bit of this cerulean blue, a little bit of primary red, and a little bit of white. We'll put it on this white blob here. So like with the gloss medium and the glazing medium, you can add any amount of paint to this medium and it won't compromise the integrity of the polymer. So I'm just gonna load up with some. Let's start with the cerulean blue. So I'm not really mixing it. You can actually mix it fully with the paint before you even use it. I just usually prefer to mix it on my brush. So I've got some cerulean blue with the medium. Let's lay it down right here so we can see the color shift. And see, it does make it a little bit more translucent, but it's not completely transparent. It's more about like this. But I used a lot more of the medium than I used of the gloss medium here. So like I said, I really like to use it for blending. So if that were just paint, I would feel kind of rushed to get my next color, because if I look right here, it's already starting to dry a bit on the edge. So I got some more medium and I'm gonna get some white. Start just below it here and come up into it, and the surface feels very, very smooth, much more smooth than just paint and water. And I get a really nice crisp blend in there. Get a little of this primary red. Start just below that white and go right up into it. And again, a nice smooth blend. Now, acrylic paint on its own dries in a thin layer like this in about 10 to 20 minutes. So I'm gonna let this sit here for about 10 minutes, and then we'll come see how it is and if we can still blend into it with a little bit more matte medium. While that dries, I'm gonna take a little bit of this phthalo blue, and I'm gonna paint an object here so that I can show you the difference between adding another color on top of a dry color with just paint and with matte medium. All right, so that's been about 10 minutes, and if I touch the paint, it's still a little tacky. I wouldn't consider it dry, but I'm not getting any paint off of my fingers. But that's to simulate maybe you're painting an entire background in, and you're really focusing on your blending, and it's taking you a few minutes. And by the time you get back to this part where you've decided you want to change it, maybe it's a little bit more dry than you would like. And if you try and go over it with just paint, you're really just going to end up painting over this. But let's say that I decide that I don't want this white here as much, and I just want to take this blue down a little bit farther into the red. So I'm going to load up with some more medium. I'm going to grab a hint of white just to try and simulate this color that I have here, and some blue. Make sure I have a good amount of medium there. Now I'm going to start here in this blue, and I can bring it down and see it's a little translucent, so I can still see that white, but I took the blue farther down over it. Where if I just used paint, I would just paint over that white and I would lose it completely. But I decided I don't want to lose that white. I just want to take it back a little bit. So this time I just picked up medium. I still had some paint on my brush, but I picked up more medium. And I'm going to take it down into the red, which is completely dry. And I just got a little bit of kind of a hazed blue color over top of that red. Now I've cleaned off my brush, and this time I'm only going to get blue. I'll add a little white into it too. Try and make that same light blue color. And this is just paint, no medium. And I'm going to demonstrate trying to do the same thing with just the paint. So I'll start up in here, and as I bring it down, notice I just painted over that white, and it's covering that red too. So see how I totally lost that there. That's the difference between painting with matte medium and without it. All right, so my phthalo blue paint here is dry now, and I have this little filbert brush that I've wet in my jar. I'm just gonna lightly wipe it on a paper towel. I find that when I use the matte medium, I don't need as much water in my brush. The matte medium actually improves the flow of the paint so that you don't have to struggle with it quite so much. So I have a little more medium here, and actually let's start with no medium. I'm just gonna come in and grab some white paint, just white paint, and I'm gonna start down here and just make some dashes, almost like I'm trying to add a highlight in this area. And notice how I'm getting these little breaks from the texture of the canvas. And as I come up, my paint gets thinner, but it's not necessarily looking blended at all. It's just kind of making white specks on this part of the blue. Now let's get a little bit more white paint and some matte medium, and I'm mixing it about 50-50. About an equal amount of white paint to matte medium. And I'm going to start right here and do the same type of thing. So just the little dashes, and you can already see that there's a little bit more transparency going on. And I'm not getting those breaks in the tip of my brush like I did down here. I'm also going to have a little bit more working time, so I don't have to worry about that having a hard line on it as I bring this over here. I'm going to get more of that mixture. I just picked it up from where I left it off, and maybe grabbing just a little bit more matte medium. And then I can come back and continue. And every time I pick up more matte medium and less paint, I'm getting a more transparent color. Now I'm just going to pick up medium. There's still the tiniest hint of white on my brush. Just getting medium. Maybe just a tiny bit more white. But if you're doing like skin tones and you want a really subtle transition, but you don't want to have to blend back and forth, this is a really good type of brush technique to use, and the medium is going to help make bridging those gaps between the colors so much easier. Now I am just picking up medium. And again, there's still the tiniest hint of white on my brush. I'm just going to take that out until you can't even see it anymore. And this part over here that I've kind of neglected, even if it's dry, which, yeah, it's about dry, I can just go back to it with some more of the white and matte and continue. If you were using water to do this, I know I keep harping on this point, but if you were using water to do this, your paint would be thinned down way too much. So I know that looks really white right here, but that's just the medium. And one way you can tell whether or not that's the medium or whether or not that's the paint is to go like that and see that's pretty transparent. So that just means that the white I'm seeing is because the medium is heavy there. There's really not much white on my brush at all right now. So then once this dries and the matte medium has become perfectly clear, you'll see a much gradual transition than we would ever get just using pure white paint here. Now the Slo-Dri blending medium can be used in much the same way as I used on both of these examples. You could absolutely use this in place of the matte medium. Again, the reason I don't is because I prefer the texture of the matte medium to the texture of the Slo-Dri. I just feel like the Slo-Dri is a little bit stickier, and a lot of people who did the Moon River painting, for example, complained that they just had a sticky mess after using this one. So if you've had that problem, get some matte medium, because it's gonna make your life a lot easier when you're trying to do really subtle blends and fades like these. Okay, this is dry now, and hopefully you can see how that transition worked and how this transition didn't work. Here you would have to do a lot of color mixing to get a fade, and you might not want that pastel blue that you would get from mixing the white with the phthalo blue. Here I got a transition and no pastel blue. So it depends on what you want to do. If you watched my video for the Scream, when I was highlighting and shadowing the face of the Scream, I used this same technique. So a lot of the time his face was completely dry, but I was able to get nice smooth transitions without having to remix the color that had already dried. The Slo-Dri blending medium will give you about 40% extra time to work the paint. I don't think the matte medium has quite as much extra working time, but the amount of working time that it's given me has been completely sufficient, especially considering the fact that I can layer a wet color over top of a dry color and get a nice blended effect. All right, the last medium we're gonna talk about is Flo Aid. So I've had a lot of questions about Flo Aid, what it's used for, how to use it. So we're gonna talk about that real quick. So Flo Aid works by actually breaking the surface tension of the water, which helps reduce friction between the paint and the canvas and reduces drag between the two paints. Now this doesn't contain binder, so less is more. Don't use more of this thinking that you're really gonna get awesome results. So Flo Aid is actually meant to be mixed with water. Now the ideal mixture of Flo Aid to water is 1 part Flo Aid to 20 parts water. So for my quart jar here, which I usually fill about halfway full, as you can see, that would be roughly 2.4, or just under 2.5 teaspoons of Flo Aid in all of this. And then whenever I dip my brush in my water to get a little bit of extra water, I pick up just enough of that Flo Aid to really help make the paint flow more easily. It can help reduce brush strokes, and it can actually increase the drying time of your paint, which means that you'll be able to have a little bit of extra working time to blend. So that's why Flo Aid is in a little bottle, because you don't use very much of it. So let's test it out a little bit without Flo Aid. So I've got some water on my brush, and we'll pick up a little bit of white, and we'll just make a line right here. This is just titanium white and water. So I have some breaks and a little bit of drag. So let's test this out. It's very, very liquidy, and you shouldn't shake it because then it will get foamy. So if you shake it and it gets some foam in it, just let it sit until it's gone. I don't know if you can tell, it is very, very liquidy. Stir it around a little. And now let's test it with our paint. So wipe it off on my brush. A little bit of white paint. Got a little more water. I'm not noticing a huge difference here. A little bit. I'm not getting quite as much drag. But we'll test the drying time. I'm just going to make a few test lines and see if I can... Oh, actually, I do notice a little bit of a difference there. That's much smoother, and I was able to get that paint to cover a much broader area. So I think maybe I just wiped off too much water in the last ones. But notice I just got those 4 little lines on 1 load of paint for each line, and I got this with 1 load of paint. So that is actually pretty cool. So let's let it dry for a minute. Actually, this first line that I did with no Flo Aid is dry. This next one is about dry. And after a few more minutes, that one's still a little bit wet. I got a little bit of white paint on my finger. The super thin parts of this one are dry, and the thicker areas still a little bit tacky. It wasn't very long. It was maybe 5 minutes total. Now the matte medium and the gloss medium, as well as the Slo-Dri blending medium, all have gel counterparts. So they do essentially the same thing these ones do, just in a gel form, which is what you would want to use if you wanted texture. So a lot of people ask if they can use gloss gel in place of gloss medium for the paintings that I've done. And the answer has always been no, because I'm not trying to get that oil painting and pastel look. But if that's what you're going for, then you can absolutely do that. And we will talk about gel and paste and texture mediums in the next video. So I hope that this information was helpful for you, and I hope it helped demystify fluid mediums for you. The 2 mediums that I absolutely recommend that you get a hold of are the gloss and the matte medium. They're both used for different things like I've shown you, and they're both incredibly helpful. If there's a question that you have that I didn't cover, leave me a comment below and I will see if I can answer that for you. If you like this video, please make sure to give it a thumbs up and maybe share it with a friend who you think would like it as well. If you haven't yet already, please make sure you subscribe so that you can paint with me every week and occasionally get helpful videos like this one. Make sure you check out my website at paintingwithjane.com and sign up for my mailing list so that you never miss an update. Thank you as always for watching, everyone, and I'll see you next time.